a little dancing animated GIF. The grading tool will put one in for you. Or you'll see a comment from me at the bottom that says, good work, great work, done, excellent, thanks. I'll try and make some sort of comment.
Okay, so if there's no comment, you haven't done it yet.
If there's no comment, then I haven't gotten to it yet.
We have to go to these assignments.
Cool. So today we're going to talk about flexbox, which is a relatively recent addition to CSS, relatively recent years, to help us lay out content on a page. Before I jump into that, were there any questions or unresolved things from yesterday's homework that you'd like me to go over before we jump into flexbox?
One question. So I made a class. I was talking about it earlier. I made a class for pictures, so that I could just upload several pictures and into class. So I did an unordered list class. Then I did my LI and add my pictures, and it would not allow me to. It wouldn't affect it at all. When I did just dot, the name of the class was girls, so I did dot girls. Then I did my height, width, and orientation. It didn't work. Ben showed me to add comma and then image, so I should say I tried dot class space li dot class space li image dot class space image. I couldn't get it to work, and for some reason adding a comma fixed it. We didn't talk about anything about any commas.
Yeah, we did talk briefly about
right
commas.
There, girls, comma, image.
Okay, so let me clone this repository and let's take a look at it. So I'm going to grab your GitHub link, and I'm going to clone this repository. So I'm going to pull down your repository into my computer, and then I'm going to run your code, and we'll see if we can figure out what's going on.
Well, like basically what I did with yours yesterday, right?
Yes, yeah. Like you cloned my cohort repo, I'm cloning your homework repository. And the internet is slow. If the internet is slow back here, it's something we're working on. Hopefully Jason and I will have some time this afternoon to look at it.
And I tried to watch the video, but it's 4 hours.
Yeah.
And it's hard to find. And then I was looking at your code and just how you did things a little different. I mean, I just didn't happen to see any commas. I just didn't, we might have talked about it. I just didn't.
Yeah. So the idea of a comma is that that separates two different selectors that will have the same rule applied. So if you have selector 1, comma, selector 2, comma, selector 3, and then the rule, that rule applies to all of those selectors rather than like copying and pasting them.
What if you don't have the comma? Because I know in my CSS I have multiple spots where I have like,
let's look
say
at,
if it's like unordered list,
and
then the images in that list is just unordered list space image.
Yeah.
And that works as well.
We will talk about those. Let's take a look at what's going on here with your site, and then we will see if we can figure it out. So let's get your site up here. So here's your site. And we're on the site where the images you are working with.
The other page. And see now
on page 2.
Yes, page 2. Which, see, okay, so that one. So what happened?
So
now,
these images here.
Yeah. So those 2 images were the ones that I added to the class.
Cool.
Before, what I had was just image, which I didn't get a chance because we had our thing. I didn't get to see. So basically, what happened? Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Okay. That is putting an image in line in your HTML. So this is, when we do like image source equals images fish.jpg.
Right, yes.
Right? This is pulling the actual contents of the image into a big string. Right? So you can see here that the source is some data and it's a JPEG, and this is an encoding of the binary image into text. So you can like slam it right into the HTML. That's what that craziness is.
Okay, so now originally what I did in my CSS is I just did image, and then I did size, and I did size, height, width, and orientation, and that did all of my images.
Yeah.
I wanted to do that class different.
Okay.
But now when I did it, I got the classwork, but now I see that it overrode my actual image orientation.
So you have an unordered list with a class of girls with a capital G. Then you have some LIs inside and images inside of that. Let's go take a look at your CSS.
There was a comma in the code.
It's not
no
in there,
comma
it's
in
in
there.
the CSS.
Yes. So in the CSS.
Oh,
So
girls has a lowercase g.
girls has a lowercase g. So if I make this a capital G, so here's what this means. This means, I'm going to close this block. Let me see if I do this.
Yeah, Gavin, that's also a tip to always use lowercase.
I was gonna
Mhm.
say, yeah, I definitely need to use
Yeah.
lowercase too.
So I think this was your image issue earlier with the pictures that the Mac. So here's a trick. Like if you make a directory called pictures on your computer with a capital P, the Mac won't care if you say my URL is pictures fish.jpg, because the Mac is case preserving. It will remember if you typed capital P pictures, but case insensitive. It doesn't care. So this URL and this URL are exactly the same and will work on the Mac. This will not work on the server. The server is case sensitive. So this may have been your problem because I think you made your directory capital P pictures, but you may have used a lowercase p.
Actually, I did look at that. Actually, they were uppercase as well.
Were they? Okay.
Yeah.
So as Catherine said, like most of the time we programmers do everything in lowercase. It's just easier, right? Like let's pick one. It's lowercase. That's what we're doing. So your directories are lowercase. Your CSS is lowercase. You don't have to worry about it. The one difference for y'all, we're going to do .NET. .NET uses capitals for things, where we don't use capitals for things. But as a general, like you want to keep your CSS classes lowercase. So what this means here, .girls, comma image. Well, this is the same thing as doing this. See how I duplicated that? .girls, comma image is like repeating that once for girls and once for image. That's what the comma means. It's separating that I want this rule to apply to this selector, and by the way, here's a totally different selector, and I want these same rules to apply. They don't work together, right? It's just saying both of these selectors have this style. So
Yeah, see above there, I have image, height, width, and object width.
yes.
Which
So
is the only way I can get it to
so
work.
now all your images will have this instead, because it's like doing it's almost like you typed. It's almost like you meant to type. Here's how the computer sees it. That's the other one. Height. So
I just did easy. Just trying to get
yeah. So the computer thinks you did this. Like, cool, hey, my images are going to be 300 pixels high, 300 pixels wide, and they're going to contain. And like, oh, okay, for some reason Alan changed his mind, and now he's telling me that all images are 700 by 700.
right.
Right? So what you mean here to say, if you mean to say, so this is that girls are 700 by 700, and all images are 700 by 700, right? That's what this means. This is what this is saying. This is not what you meant. If you, what you want to say is all image within a container that has the .girls class are 700 by 700.
Right.
What you mean to say is, hey, here's girls. Within that, within an object and a container and a parent that has that class, any images are width 700 pixels and height 700 pixels.
And that's what I mentioned. Okay.
Right? The space here means this when it's contained inside of this.
Which is what I did, and it wouldn't affect it.
Let's take a look.
It's because you're capital.
Okay, because it was because of the capital G is why.
Yeah, yeah. So over here you have capital G.
So if I change that to lowercase g,
And then over here, let's see.
so now
This is your
those
girls.
pictures should be 700 by 700.
The ceiling
and the
thing.
rest should be 300.
Let's see if we do 100. Do these change? Yep,
Yes.
700 by
But
700.
now, what about the one above it? That's not part of it. What about that one? That one still say 300.
Let's see how big. Yep, 300 by 300.
So that's what it was. So it was a typo then.
Yeah,
I was doing it correctly. It was the
Yeah.
it was the G.
they are case sensitive.
So once
Also-
I added the comma, because they didn't care about the capital G because it was just changing all images.
Now
to
all
700.
images are 700, including this one.
Right, which
Right.
I just saw the girls change and it became 9 o'clock. Okay.
Yeah. Also note, like, this capital W, while I think it will work, and actually, right, it's telling me this. And if you have prettier turned on, notice that it fixes it for me.
Ah.
Right. So prettier will fix some of these things, but also look, if you have the linter turned on, all these little red dots, like you should start to get sensitive to these little red dots if they're showing up in your editor, because it's telling you like something's not quite right here or something's unexpected, right? It's telling me here that I've defined an image tag, but you've also defined an image tag
So that's
on line
what
47.
the comma just caused a conflict right now?
No. So the comma's gone. The comma here is fine. Let's get rid of it. What this is telling me is you have an image definition here.
Right.
But if I also scroll up to line 47, there's another image definition here.
Okay.
And we really shouldn't have two different image definitions.
I should just move those definitions into that.
Yeah, we should just take this and put it in here.
Right.
And then it's going to be happy.
Yeah,
So- No, go ahead.
you'll hear developers talk a lot about dry code. Do not repeat yourself. So that's what it basically was doing. You're repeating yourself by having two image areas.
Right.
So if you keep remembering dry, do not repeat yourself. You put those things together. So it's a good.
Which I was definitely trying to do. So I was on the right path. It's just if I would have fixed that G, it would have done what I was trying to get it to do.
Or you could have made this a capital G.
Right, either way.
Either way.
Either way.
But go for lower cases. That's what's going on, right?
Stay lower.
So you used it here. We said all of the ULs and all of the OLs have no list style decoration, and they should be 20 pixels tall.
Right.
That's what this means. ULs and OLs will have this, right? If you had said this would mean all of my ordered lists that are contained inside of an unordered list.
Okay.
That's what this means, right? So the space in a CSS selector means parent-child, and you can have parent, child, grandchild, great-grandchild, great-grandchild, right? All of those. You can string them along. But commas mean I'm just not repeating myself.
Right.
This and this and this, successive selectors, all have the same styles.
Okay.
Cool. Anybody else have questions on theirs or something they wanted clarified? Nope. Cool.
Awesome.
So yeah, no worries. Let's talk about flexbox. So we worked on kind of centering images the other day, and I think you asked Gabe about like how do we do an image gallery? How do we have like a grid of things? How do we control the flow of a page in very specific ways? So before we had things like flexbox, we would have these weird things where we were using different margins and setups to try and like push and pull things around the page. What flexbox lets us do, right? It says right here. I'll drop this in Slack, although I think it was in your like read more about flexbox. If you want to read along, the link is in Slack, right? It's a way to provide layout, align and distribute space among items, even when their size is unknown, right? So the idea here is we want to take some container, whether it's like an unordered list or a div or a navigation, and describe how to fill the space inside of it with the items that we're putting in it. So
That's way easier than.
yeah, you're going to see there's lots of flexibility
There
here,
we go.
right? And we want to be able to like talk about like how we make free space, how we align things, how we grow and shrink them to fit this container that we're trying to describe. And it can also do vertically aligned layouts, right? So a lot of websites have these, like, vertical. Like if you look at suncoast.io, right? It's primarily a vertical layout, but it also has some vertical layouts inside of the vertical layouts, right? And sometimes has horizontal layouts, right? So a page is going to have some things that are vertical and things that are horizontal inside, or horizontal layout with vertical things inside. That's what Flexbox is going to let us do, right? So the most important thing in Flexbox is to understand that we talk about two different kinds of things. We talk about the container and the items inside. So we know that when we're building HTML, everything is nested. Flexbox works on the idea of identifying some container. In this case, it's the purple box is our container, whether this is a div or it's a nav or a section or whatever it is. We have some other elements directly inside as first level children of that parent container. Right? We have a UL with an LI right inside, and a LI sibling next to that, and an LI sibling next to that.
So the UL would be the container?
The UL would be the container, and our LIs would be our items, our children. So we've seen, we've done display block, we've done display inline. Here we set display flex on the parent. What this is saying is that the parent container is not getting the flexing. It's the children inside, one level deep. It is the next level children that are going to be flexibly displayed and flowed, but their children are not, right? So the parent gives onto the child flexibility, but the child can't pass that along to their children, right? If we want the grandchildren to be flexed, we have to flex the child, right? So this is a one level deep association.
Is this recording?
It is recording. So we say to the container, hey, your display style is going to be flex.
What is flex?
For flexible layout. Adjustable layout, we're going to flex the amount of space around these items. We want to describe how to lay out these children elements inside of the parent in a flexible way.
How does it define what flex is when, like, inside the container, just evenly distributed?
We're going to see there's like 16 different ways. There's like, Flex has got configurations out the wazoo. And this site's going to run us through all of them. So we set display flex on the container, and now all of the things inside, we can start to control their layout. We can set the direction. Do we mean to set these items in a vertical orientation, or do we want them to be run horizontally? By default, we're setting it in row, which means left to right, or column being top to bottom, right? This is row flexing, and this is column flexing. So let's take a look at what happens. I think there's a good example right in here. Let's take a good example of the kinds of things we can do, and then let's come back and look at some of the options. Like, we're scrolling past all these options of things that it can do. So let's look at a simple example, right? We want perfect centering, right? We talked about the other day about like doing the margin auto thing. Here we want this child element to be centered with the parent. Oh, they actually don't give us that. They actually don't give us that element. Let's look at this one instead, because they actually give us this one. So we have these 6 elements here. Can I open this up on CodePen? Oh, edit on CodePen, that's what I'm looking for. It's a little bit easier if you can see the HTML. All right, so we have this UL, and we've given this a class called Flex Container, and then we have 6 LIs inside. And you'll notice that on the Flex Container, we've said display flex, right? ignore some of these other things for a second. We're going to come back to it. And we've said that the list style is none. You'll notice that when I'm in full screen mode, exit full screen, that when I move this around, you'll notice that the space in between these kind of grows and shrinks based on how much space there is. So I'm making more and more space. Now there's room for number 6 to pop in, and the space here is a little bit less. Right? And as I widen this, I get more space. If I shrink it all the way down, right, I get kind of a column layout. Right? This is because I applied display flex, let me get rid of these, to the parent UL. If I comment this out, right, I just get a whole bunch of list items, right, in their default way, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, going down the page. Once I say display flex, I get a row-based layout, and we're going to talk about all the things that we can now configure with the children.
So
Question.
with this, if you were to say each child, I guess, if it's affecting the child one layer deep, if you have an unordered list with the flex container class in this situation, I guess, then every list item is affected by that. So the list item is then another container that then you can have like an image with text centered under that, and then the text will move with the image, correct?
So here I made a P tag inside of this first LI.
Okay.
This P tag is not flexed. This P tag does not get the flexing of the
Right,
parent.
it's bound to the list item.
Yes.
And anything within that. So if it has a constraint that is keeping it like centered on an image, then it'll stay centered on that image no matter how the image moves.
Yes,
Okay.
this will always be now constrained by its relationship to this parent here.
Okay.
Why isn't 3 hellos popping up in the box?
Because they're flowing off the bottom. 1, 2. Let me make these spans instead. No, I want them to be.
Is it because you have unrestricted height?
Yeah, and they probably have overflow.
Well, they got a line height of 150.
Yeah, they're trying to make these nice, pretty boxes for me. With height, margin top, text align center. I think it's because.
Is there like a margin on the P tag or something?
No. Here's my 1, 2, and 3. Let's see if we can figure out where the 1, 2, and the 3 are. Oh, and now I can't see. There's my 1, there's my 2. It's down below. It's down below. Let's see if we take the P tag, margin, 0, heading 0. Let's change this and just make these. Oh, wait, there it went. 1, 2, and 3. Cool. There was margins on the P. Right, so here's my 1, 2, and 3, and you can see they're just done as regular P tags. There's nothing fancy. If I say flex items are also display flex, right? Now these are flexed inside of this container, right? So these 1, 2, and 3 are not flexing with the boxes, they're flexing with each other, right? So the flex relationship, the only important thing is it just goes one level deep, right? And if that then has items, you want to be able to control the flexibility of, you got to make that display flex and then their children.
But so if the items within that child are not flexed or whatever, then
The
they
parent is flexed. We don't say that the items are flexed, the parent
the
is
parent
flexed.
is flexed and that then
Affects
affects
the child.
Okay. So if the parent of this container is flexed, then this smaller container, everything in there is still static relative to each other.
It will just follow whatever layout you told
Right,
it to,
okay.
right? We don't get any of the flex capabilities of those elements unless its direct parent is display flex.
Okay.
So if we want to control using flexbox some elements, you have to look at those elements parent and see if that's display flex, right? That display flex does not cascade down like other things do, right? If we say on my UL, make the font size 30 pixels. The LIs inside will be 30 pixels. The P's inside of that LI are 30 pixels. The font cascades down.
Right.
Flex does not. Right? It's one of the things that does not cascade down, and that's a challenge that most students have. Is like, oh, I set flex. How come my nested thing inside my nested thing isn't flexing the way I
So
want?
what you're saying is you can't directly flex an item. You have to flex the parent.
You set the parent to be display flex, and the children are then
Are they-
following this flexible layout.
Is there a way to flex more than one layer deep?
No. Display
You have to
flex,
do it
display flex,
individually?
display
Okay.
flex, display flex, all the way down. So let's take a look at some of the things they set here. We just set the container to be display flex. We tell that the flex flow, which is one of the attributes, to be row and to wrap, which means if we run out of space, I want items to take up part of the next line, right? So it's going to try and use as much space as it can, but if it runs out of space on that line, whatever is too big to fit will wrap to the next line.
And oh, sorry, go ahead.
Nope, that was all I was going to say.
You started.
Okay.
Yep.
It's when it wraps, it goes to the center. That's because of auto margins, correct?
Nope. That's
No.
because the next thing is we've said, how do I want to justify the content? I want to say here that the content is justified by putting space around every item. Remember we talked about margin auto, we said that margin auto says, I want enough space to my left, I want enough space to my right. But that's just for one element to its container. In Flex, I say, I want space around each item. It's telling the browser, however these items are laid out in this row, whatever extra space, count up all the white space on that row. So if I jammed all these 5 together, I would have some amount of white space here at the end. I want you to take that amount of white space and evenly divide it around each of these items. Right?
When you flex inside so you flex the number inside the box, why would you flex the child, and why did it go to the corner?
Because once you say you're flexing these, right, then all of the positioning, the normal positioning just goes away, and we have to follow the flex positioning.
So the margin becomes ineffective if it's flexed.
It still does, but it's relative to the children, and they're trying to display themselves in a
Okay.
row. It's not very typical to say flex, 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 flex all the way down unless you need the parent to have a flexibility and the children to have a flexibility. We tend mostly just to do one layer because those are most of the layouts that we're doing. Where you'll see nesting, like this may be a flex layout where this is one element, right? This is like our number 1 and this is like our number 2. And then Jason may have said, I want this to be flex, but in a column. And I want this to be flex in a column, right? That may be how he did this. I don't know.
Flex inside of it.
This may be also, this whole thing here might be flex. And then you could say flex on this and flex on this so that I have,
And then flex on the buttons too.
nope. These are probably just flexed all the way down here, right? In a column. I want community and then this and then this and then the 2 buttons.
Got it.
So then
Yeah.
if that space that they're in was squished and they were column flexed, then they would wrap horizontally?
Only if we said
Only if
wrap.
you told it to do that. Okay.
Right. So this kind of looks like an equal amount of space. Oh, this is a little bit less, right? So maybe this is using space around. So let's take a look at what happens if we take out the space around. See what happened? These are still flex, but they're just going to run up against each other. If we measured this amount of white space, right, it's probably equal to if I added up all of this white space.
So if you don't have space around or something like that, then what is flex doing?
It's
if
giving
you
me,
squish the window, would it wrap a box down? Okay.
right? It's telling me I want these things to be in a row.
Until they hit this wall.
Yeah.
Okay.
Until they, so before when we said like things flow left to right until they take up all the space, right? We made our UL and it takes up all the space. Now what we're saying is when we flex this, I want the children to kind of like be in a single row as best we can. And if you run out of space, just go ahead and wrap and take up space on the next line.
Whereas if that wasn't flexed and you
Yeah.
brought it in, then it would just continue, and you would have to like scroll to see it.
If I do it this way, they're this way, right?
Okay.
Because these are block level elements. The UL and the LIs are blocks.
So it takes up that entire line.
Once I say display flex, the UL is saying, hey LIs below, I'm going to control how you're laid out. The UL is going to say, hey children, you all are all flexed, and I'm going to give you rules about how you're to lay yourselves out. And the block level nature of LIs goes away.
What happens if you change the list style?
Different things will happen. Let's take a look at what happens if I take away flex.
But define
Wrap.
that extra space.
See what happens now when I take away
Nice.
wrap, right? When I take away wrap, this happens. So this is just basically display flex with no justification, right? So in a normal display flex, it just takes the elements and puts them one after another on the line, and as I shrink the page down, they all flex themselves to get smaller, right? They're trying to be as big as they can to fill the line, but no bigger necessarily than their width and their height, right?
And so since that goes one level deep, that's why the actual like width of the box is squishing, but the number is unaffected.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm making these boxes smaller, and it can't honor the 200 by 150 anymore because I've shrunk too small. And since I don't have wrap on, it's saying, well, I wish I could have more space, but I'm just going to make these things smaller to fit the space I have. If I put flex wrap on, now when I start to run out of space, it's saying, well, these things need to be 200 by 150, and since I can wrap to the next line, I won't shrink them, I'll just push them to the next line as best I can.
So
1, 2,
if you
3,
were
4,
to
5,
flex
6.
it so that it was all in one vertical line, and then go past that so that the box itself is wider than the page, would it then start to squish the box, or would it just go off the page?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Push it all the way down till they go into a column,
Mm-hmm.
and then it keeps, like, he's asking if you keep squishing it.
No, I think at that point they would keep their size.
And they would just spill off of the page.
Yeah, it would just spill off the page. Yeah, because there's nothing more to wrap at that point. We could figure that out if I made these bigger. I don't think I can make. Make it like 600 pixels, right? Yeah, at that
So
point.
it does squish the box then?
Yeah,
Okay.
until I get to like whatever this is, right? It's going to keep squishing it. But I can't, for some reason, the browser has got a size restriction on it. I can't make it any thinner than that.
Okay.
Right, so the thing to remember here is flex wrap by default is row, so it's going to put all of our content in one row. And then we can start controlling how the spacing and the wrapping of those child elements are. So let's take a look at some of the things that we can do to affect the flow of this page, right? So right, are we dealing with rows or are we dealing with columns? And I always think this is a little bit weird because when I look at the flex wrap row, it kind of seems like it's making columns, but you have to think about how they're laid out on the page, right? They're in one row or are they in one column, right? So the next thing was flex wrap, right? By default, flex items will try to fit into one line. We can change that to allow items to wrap as necessary. So if we say no wrap, which is the default, all the items will be on one line. If we say the flex wrap is wrap, then the items will wrap onto multiple lines from top to bottom. And if we say wrap reverse, the items will wrap onto multiple lines from bottom to top. Let's see what happens if we say wrap reverse. Right? Now the 5 and the 6 are above and it's pushing the other things below, right? So it's kind of like wrapping above.
Why would you want to use that?
Hmm?
Why would you want to use
I don't know. It depends on what your design is, right? The style stuff is going to give you all of the options, right? There may be a darn good reason in your design why you would want that to happen. right? I can't think of one off the top of my head, right? But if you're doing a photo thing for some reason and you want those to be on top, you've got the options. Oops, did not mean to do that. Okay. Let's skip that one. Let's talk about justify content. So you saw that when we had these in here in our flexbox and we had no space around, they're all jammed up against the left-hand side and the extra space is at the right. If we said flex, we give it justify content, we're talking about, right, if you think about like your Word documents, like left justified, right justified, that kind of thing. This is saying the entire group of items, how should I deal with the white space? Should I put the elements at the beginning and put the white space at the end? Should I put the elements at the end and put the white space in the beginning? Should I center all of them and put the white space on either side? Should I put the extra white space evenly between each item? Should I put the white space around everything? Or should I space them evenly? So let's see what would happen in our demo if instead of doing justify content flex start, which is the default, if we said justify content flex end, right? Now they're over here. If I said justify content center, right? Now everything is centered, right? This is kind of like our margin auto trick, but this gives us way more choices on how we want this to do, right? So if you have some container and you just want all the things inside of it to be center, you can display flex, justify content center, and now everything's centered inside all those elements.
If you justify content flex end, the space on the left, can you fill that with a column, or is that white space still considered part of the flex? It's
part of this row.
Got it.
Now,
so
if
I'd have to start below that row basically if I wanted to do something else.
I mean, if there was a background color here,
it would fill that.
Right, it would fill that. Right, if there was a background image, it would fill that space.
Wouldn't that change the whole background color though? Or is it just in the container?
Just
It's
the
within
container.
that container.
Yeah.
It's under the flex container.
Yeah, it's just on this flex container. Right. So that background is right, and watch what's happened if I do space between.
Nice.
Yep. So I can set a background of that, or I can put a background image and then lay these things out on top of them.
But if you wanted something to span the whole page, you just change the background color to the same.
Yeah. Right, and it's still right. If I do right, it's not essentially it's not necessarily like white space. It's transparent. It's whatever's below
That's what I
that.
was asking, is
will
if
flow
it
through.
stopped or if it did go the whole thing, but you just don't see
Yeah.
it. Okay.
So if I did here, if I did background color white, right? Now I'm saying this container, the background color is white, which sits above the body background color of yellow.
It gives the illusion that it's the background.
Yeah. I mean, it's the background of this element,
Of that
which is on
element,
top of the
right.
background of this element,
Right.
right? They're layered.
I understand.
Yeah. So justify content will tell us kind of where do I want to push the content to, or how do I want to put space around it?
Can you make the background empty so just the other yellow would go through?
Yes. So if I said transparent,
And that's what it defaults to, correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
It's the background color.
yeah, background color.
Is that going to be dependent on the browser's like user assigned attributes or whatever it was?
No, by default, every item has no background that lets whatever behind it through. That's the default.
Okay.
I think for almost every element. Right.
Okay.
True of images too. If you have a PNG and that PNG file has transparent pixels in it, the background of it will show through that as well. Right. So if you have like a round logo.
And it's bigger than that with transparency.
Well, if instead of this LI with a 3 inside of it, if this was an LI that had a round image, right? So a square image where there was the CBS logo, but the pixels around the CBS logo were transparent, not white, then the background color would shine through those transparent pixels of your image.
That's good to know.
Yep.
That might cause a problem.
If you
Yeah.
if you move the body to the bottom, will everything disappear? It just be yellow.
No. Right, because the body is still applying to the body of this here. It doesn't matter the order of these things. It's what it's applying to.
That's a good question. It doesn't matter what order you put it in. It's 0, 1, and 2 that matters.
Yes.
Correct?
But two selectors of the same specificity, the bottom one will override.
The bottom one overrides,
Yes.
not the top one.
Yes. So if you have two selectors that both have the same level of detail,
Right.
and they apply to the same item, whichever one happened last
So
in the
on my
CSS.
code, when I had image and then I had image, I didn't even know that image was up there because it wasn't even doing anything.
Yeah, because they both had a specificity of
image.
on image,
Right.
and this one overrided that one. So if you
And then
flip
when I did
them,
my class with the comma, that overrode both of those.
hmm
Got it.
And so
Yep.
that's it will apply the first one, but then it applies the second one over top and overwrites that.
hmm
Okay.
yeah, because it's reading that file or your files in an order,
That makes sense.
and when it gets to the second one, it's like, oh, this one replaces that one. I'll throw this one away and use this one.
That makes sense. The last one.
The last one,
that
only
makes
if they're exactly equal.
Right.
Yep. And that's why Catherine was saying we try and lay out our CSS in a very particular order. So we have
Right.
if we flow things also in like specificity order, so we don't confuse ourselves with something that's more specific later than something that's less specific.
Which I was trying to do. I just happened to use a
Yeah.
freaking
So so if this controls for a row our flex going this way, what if we wanted to left to right? What if we wanted to do top and bottom? So this is justified content. This says align items. Do we want to align items at the start, at the top, the end at the bottom, center this way? Oh, what? Vertical centering in addition to horizontal centering? Wait, we never talked about doing vertical centering because it used to be a pain in the right? We can stretch them or we can set them to the baseline. So here the baseline is the baseline of the text that's going to be in there, right? So if these things have particular sizes, but they have text inside, you can baseline it, you can justify against the baseline of the text, right? If you're a very typography heavy page, right, and you want all your text to be equal, but maybe you've got like background images that are a different size, you can say, I want all my text to be perfectly even and let the items flow around it.
And that'll work regardless of the text size.
Mhm.
It just goes to the absolute bottom of the
Yeah,
text.
every text, whatever it's, not necessarily the bottom, it's the baseline of the text.
Right.
So Y's go below the baseline kind of thing.
Like if you were writing on like lined paper.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, where you go underneath. So,
So that the text just is defined in the list item.
and whatever our item is, it doesn't have to be list items. It could be a div with P's below. It could be a nav with things below. It could be a main with sections below. It's just whatever the parent and child are. ULs and LIs are pretty common cases for this, but it's not the only one. And then we can see here stretch is the default. So let's see what would happen here if we changed align items center. I don't think we get anything because I think this is this high. Let's make the flex container height bigger. Let's make this height twice as tall as the elements. Right, cool. Now they're centered inside of this 300 pixel
I
high.
see. So you said okay.
Yep.
And
Right.
that's the vertical center.
This is the vertical centering. So align item center controls where we are this way. So if I said align items flex end, right?
Not records. It's going to start being
It
manual.
is. It is. Why is flex start
Oh, yeah, reverse.
down there?
So there's
Oh, because maybe wrap reverse. Yeah, because I have wrap reverse.
so there's flex
Good looking out.
start and flex end, which is top to bottom. Is there also flex left and right?
No, that's justify content.
Right. Okay.
So justify content on a row is left and right, and align items is up and down. Right. So
okay.
justify content, we're controlling the horizontal, like right, and then align items is controlling the vertical.
Okay.
Good looking out with the reverse there. So if we did stretch, right? We don't get anything because we've set a fixed height here, right? But if we didn't have a height, it would stretch these out as tall as this is, well, as tall as
So
our.
you can use stretch if you want to fill your box rather than trying to guess the height
Yes.
to the edge. You can just say, hey, stretch.
Yes. Yep. Cool. So centering. So here's our align content. Did we do align content? We did justify content. Okay. So align content is how we treat the entire set of content, right? Flex start, flex end, right? So this property doesn't have any effect when there's only one line of flex items. This is how do we align the content as a group when they wrap. So when they're wrapped, do we want them to wrap in the center, or do we want them to wrap at the start or at the end? Right. So one line like this, no matter what we do for align content, will have no effect. But as soon as we start wrapping, flex, wrap. As soon as we start doing this, then that align content will tell us how should we deal with the multiple lines that we've wrapped to.
Where's your align content on that?
By default, I think it's stretch. Right, so it's trying to take up all the space.
So you don't have an align content in that pen.
No.
There, it's just doing that automatically.
Yeah. So every one of these is going to tell you what the default is
Right,
for
okay.
every one of these attributes, right? So stretch looks like this, right? It's just going to fill the space.
Right. Okay.
So if I said, oops, align content center. I think because I put this height here.
Align items and align content.
So align items affects when there's just one row. Align content is how do I deal with the lines plural when it wraps. I think this is too small to really see the height.
Will text align function the same way in this situation?
So text align only deals with the text inside. So see how the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is centered? That's because we've done text align there, right? So text align only refers to the text content of the element itself. So we don't have a child of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is the text of the li, and you can clearly center text that way. The reason why this text is centered vertically is because notice we set the line height and the height to be the same, right? So this text is 150 pixels tall. If I take this line height off, the text is at the top. So a cheap way for, like, if you have an li with some text inside and you want the text horizontally centered, that's text align. If you want it vertically centered, set your line height equal to the height of that element. Text is always by default vertically centered in whatever it is, right? But if we set the line height to its default, the line height is just this tall, right? It ends at the bottom of the 1, and it is vertically centered where the
Within
text
that
is,
line height.
within that line height, right? The line height is just going to be one row. But we tell it, no, I want a line to be 150 pixels. It's going to say, cool, my entire text line is now this big, and my 1 is vertically centered.
Is
Right.
there a way, if you were stretching that box vertically, is there a way for the line height to move with it? So that number or text is always vertically centered?
Do you do like auto?
I don't think so. Let's find out. No. I think you have to set it explicitly to the same. I think so. Yeah. I'll research a little bit, but I've always seen it just done where they're set together. I'm not 100% sure. So let's see what else. So notice that this column in this is like the best guide to Flexbox. And I'm going to give you an activity to do that will like reinforce that you can practice these. But all of these properties we're setting on the parent. Every one of these so far we've set on the parent to describe what's going on.
That's the parent flex container, right?
Yes. All of these attributes we've set on the parent flex container. Now there are some things we can set on the children. So we can set the order of the children. So by default, items are laid out in the order that they are, but we can change the order of particular elements. So let's give this one the class cool. And if I say an li that has cool has order 0, sorry, I need to do -1. Even though it's laid out in my content this way, I told it be before anything that has an order of 0.
Oh, because you gave it negative. That was one. Okay.
Because
So
all
for
of,
that-
go ahead.
For that one list item, you have two separate classes there because of the space rather than a dash.
Yes, this is
Okay.
the class flex item,
And
and this one has the flex item cool.
So you-
Okay.
So you just subtracted 1 from 2.
No. What I've done is by default, all of these items have a default order of 0. So if we ask the browser, let's take this out for a second. If we ask the browser, hey browser, what's the order of this element? 0. What's the order of this element? 0, 0, 0, 0,
It's just the text
0.
you put in the
So you
HTML
then put
file,
negative
so-
one.
Yeah.
Got it. So it's minus
Jason,
-1 instead of 2.
Tony, Mark, Catherine, Bob, and Sam. Right? So by default, all these have a 0 order, so they're going to appear in the order they were put into the HTML. Let's see. President. Let's call that class president. I'll say any li with a president has an order of -1. So since -1 is less than 0, it's going to be at the beginning. So order -1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Right? If I do Jason is CEO, and I say, oops, CEO is order 1, he's going to be last. Right? So you can give these things different orders to allow them to flow into different directions.
What other, what can you define other than a number?
They're just numbers.
That you can only define numbers?
Because it says it's an integer. So we're going to sort them in the order of the numbers.
Yep.
So why might we have something like this? Why not just lay them out in this order? Imagine when we get to the next step, which is dealing with mobile versus desktop. What if in desktop mode you want them in a particular order, but when you get into a mobile view, you want things to be rearranged? So you can say on the desktop, I want these things to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but in mobile view, I want them to be 5, 3, 2, 1, 4 for some reason.
Can you use like an algorithm with that too, instead of an integer? Like,
No.
say like on the left.
Yeah, so the order here is always a number. So if we wanted to do this, we could give each of these LIs a different class and give every one of them a different number, but the value for the order is always going to be a number. When we get into JavaScript, you could write JavaScript code that would do something that would give these an order. Like maybe you want them ordered by their grade.
Like, yeah, we can class first.
Yes, yeah. So you could write code that would affect that order number, and then things would
Fetch that
range.
information and then
Yeah.
do with what it. Okay.
Yeah, we could go and fetch the order in which they were hired,
Right.
and then set their order to be
Based on
1 is the first person hired, 2 is the second person hired, so forth and so on. But then it wouldn't matter what order the LIs came in.
Okay.
Yep. So these things, like, they seem kind of silly, like, why would you do this, right? I would just put them in the LI orders. What we're going to see on Monday is we're going to talk about media queries, where we can say different CSS applies based on how wide or tall your viewport is. So we can say at a wide screen, just put them in the order that they are in the LIs. But in a small screen, I want this new CSS to apply, where I've applied orders to them. And you'll see the orders change.
You're saying the difference of, on my phone is a good example, I can enable desktop version, so that would be something for the desktop, it's gonna do this CSS, and the mobile version is gonna do this
Mhm.
CSS.
In the same CSS file, we can apply rules that are for the desktop, and then we can apply some rules that only apply onto mobile
Does
phone
that
sizes.
introduce like if statements and things like that?
Kind of. It's more like when the screen fits this size, this CSS applies. Otherwise, it doesn't.
So you don't have to change your HTML to adapt to. That's
Mhm.
beautiful.
We used
So
to
that
we
now
used to
is
build
the
an
CSS
entire
is-
mobile version
Right.
and an entire desktop version.
Right.
Now we build one version and we hope that it works on both. We try and make it work on both
With the CSS.
with a CSS.
So
Yeah.
that's why CSS is so
Mhm.
important.
And that's why, as we've added flexbox and media queries, all these things that have come along make this easier to do. And we're going to talk when we get to media query about the fact that a lot of people start with the mobile site because it's so small, and then they make the desktop size work, right? And they add more information, right? So maybe in the mobile size, we only show the CEO and the president, but when we get to the desktop, there's room for all of us, and we show all of our pictures.
Sure.
Those kinds of things.
And so where Catherine's name is spilling off the box there,
Mhm.
if you wanted that box to change size, or to, I guess, fit that text so that that text was centered in there, would the best practice there be to flex that individual?
Nice.
Okay.
If I take off the fixed size width, then the boxes just grow to the width they need to be.
Well, that's actually
Rather than using a margin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I could also do text overflow. Map. There's a way to set the text, what to do with text
the
overflow.
text will get smaller or bigger or round
Yeah,
when it hits the edge of the flex.
Okay.
yeah. There's some rules. I don't know them off the top of my head to say what happens when text goes beyond the limit. So there's a whole bunch of others, flex grow, flex shrink. I'm not going to go through all of these because these honestly are used a little bit less than the ones on the left-hand side, the container ones.
Right.
And the exercise I'm going to give for you to practice this, we'll go through all of these in like a little game format. You can kind of play around with them. But this really is like you will end up bookmarking this site and referring back to it like every time you're trying to do something with Flexbox. I literally, this is like Flexbox. I type in CSS tricks Flexbox, which is the name of the site. There it is, and I click on it. Like every time I'm trying to do a layout thing, I'm back. I have this up. This is my go-to reference, and I kind of look for the thing I'm trying to do. Like, yeah. I want this. Cool. That's justify content center. Or no, I want space around. That's what that is.
Right.
Will you go back to the code pen real quick?
Yes. If I can find it.
So if you wanted no space where the yellow is in between,
Mm-hmm.
what would that look like?
So I want them all jammed together in the center.
Or just without the space in between?
So that would be.
So we change the background color, right?
But you want them all up next to each other with no.
Yeah, just like the color, I think, what is it, red? Just running across the screen.
So I think this would be.
Change the background color to red.
Let's get rid of the space around and let's do center. Like that. I would just say justify content center.
And then how would you get the E?
Well, I would have to make this box bigger or the font smaller. I would have to do one of those two things.
How would you make that box bigger?
I
Because
would.
they're all is that where you would have? Because you see,
Take
you've
out the
got
width.
flex item is the class. Would you have to assign another class like flex item Catherine?
No, I would just make the boxes just a little bit bigger.
So you just do all the boxes.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your design.
Right.
Does the design say that these boxes should all be the same size and make them big enough to handle whatever text we're having?
And then you want a static defined size.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you don't have the height defined, then it's dynamic.
Correct. If I don't say a width, right, then every box. Let's turn up the border. Pixel solid black. Right. Then the boxes are just going to be as wide as they need to be to fit the content that's inside.
Which is better.
Right.
And
It
then
depends on it all depends on your design. Right. So one of the things we're going to get into is starting to mimic designs, right? So how do I take this design that was handed to me by the designer, me as the implementer? How do I take that design and honor it in code? So if they gave a design that looked like this, right? Okay, well all the boxes are equal sized. I need to honor that in my design.
So, okay, so in that situation, if they all have to be the same size and Catherine was too big,
Mm-hmm.
how would you, or let's say, for example, you wanted Catherine just to be half the size of all the other names for the design purpose, how would you affect the text for just that line? Would you have to make a new class and then set the text? Okay.
Yeah, probably.
Use an ID too if it's just that one thing.
Yeah, I would probably do something like right, maybe a longer name,
Sure.
and then say any allies that are longer name. Whoa. Font size is. What happened? I have an error. There we go. Oh, it's too small.
I see what you're saying. So you do just kind of, because you can give the perception that it's basically the same size because it's a bigger name. You won't really notice it shrinking that much.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's interesting that 1M all of a sudden is like that much smaller.
Way small.
What's the default
3M.
font size? Yeah, but the 1M should be, because this is font size 3M. That's why.
Yeah.
I'll make this 3 rems. 3 rems.
No, what is that?
2 rems. 2 rems. So this is something Jason, Catherine and I were talking about before. The way M's work is if you have a item that is 3 M's and then something inside that's 1M, that is 1/3 of the size. Rems are always relative to the font size that you declared on the body.
So is rem relative n?
Yes, relative M's. And they're always relative to the font size you set on the body of the HTML. So if I want to say this font is 3 times as big as my standard font, and I want this one to be 2 times the size of my standard font, it's better to use rems.
Oh, okay.
Because if I say, right, 3 rems, this is the same size as, if I make this 3 M's and I make this 3 M's, because these aren't parents and children of each other. If I made this font size on the container, yeah. So if this font size was on the container, we're saying that all the text in the container is 3 M's.
Yes.
Now, this being 1M is 1 times 3 M's.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so if you change that to rems, how would that affect it?
So now this would be 3 times the standard font size, and this would be 1 time the standard font size. So this Catherine is now 1 times bigger than whatever the body's default font is.
Got it.
So if you're doing a lot of things with like, I'm going to set 1 base font size for my body, and I want to use something that's a multiplier of that regardless of my parent, rems are easier to work
See, I
with.
was trying to do that.
You can take 45 for half.
Yes, so this will be half the standard font size. This is one of the standard font size. This is 9 times as big as the standard font size, regardless of what the parent is.
So rem then is a multiplier on a standard.
The rem is the multiplier of the font size you set for your body.
Okay.
So normally you're going to set a font size for your body, right? And then rems are just a ratio to that body size.
And so that
M's-
ratio will stay the same if you change the
Mhm.
initial font
It does
size.
not care about its parent.
Is that only relative to the body?
Yes.
Okay.
Rems are always relative to the body. M's are relative to the size of the font in the parent container.
Okay, that's the
Right.
distinction.
So if I have tag contained in tag, and this is 1M, this is 2M, this is 3M, this is going to be 6 times as big as this one.
Whereas if it was rem and the initial parent was the body, it goes straight back
Yep.
and skips the stuff in front.
Yep. So if the base, I know you have a question. I'm going to get to it. If this is 16 pixels and I have if I have M1, M2, M3, this will be 16. This will be 32.
32, yes.
And this will be 3 times 32.
96?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right? But if these are rems, this will be 16, 32, 48.
That's better.
Okay.
Right? So if you want a standard pacing of all your text on the thing, rems are easier than M's. especially if you start setting nested things. If you never nest M's, right, they work just like rems. But as soon as you nest an M, they're like a multiplier of a multiplier of a multiplier.
So, like the flex goes one layer deep, that goes one layer back. An M does.
An M. An M says, I'm going to be whatever the number is times as big as my parent, which might be some number of times bigger than its parent, which might be sometimes bigger than its parent, which might be...
And then
rem.
rem just ignores all that and goes straight to the source.
Go to the bottom.
Okay.
Cool. Sorry, you had a question in the back and I kept it
I
going.
was just wondering if they both had to be rem. Like if you made the top M,
No.
would it still work?
Yeah, so if this was 3 M's, this is 3 times as big as the standard. This 1 rem will be the size of the body font. This will be twice the body font. Right, this will be 3 times the body font. They're now the same because there's no nesting for the UL. Right, so it just depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for some common pacing of the font on your page and you've set the body size to your default font size, you probably want to use rems more often than you want to use M's. Cool. Let's see what else we want to talk about. Flexbox.
Can you use rems with padding as well?
Yes, everything still applies.
Okay.
Right.
Just easier than using pixels.
It can be if you're trying to keep like a rhythm to the stuff on your page. So people talk about, right, you want a pleasing, and this is something you're going to hear about tomorrow, like you want pleasing spaces, like the white space matters. So a lot of people will think about font size and then line height and then spacing as ratios to each other, right? And there are good guides to doing that, and designers will work with trying to figure out like what's the right balance of white space to non-white space on a page. And when we deal in relative sizes, then when pages grow and shrink, they maintain their good look. And Andy will talk about some of that stuff tomorrow when she does her design.
Is that on mobile too?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Cool. Let's do a demo. Let's do some demo code for today. So let's get out of here and go to dev stg cortex week 1 day 3 app alpha flexbox. No. So let's play around with the flexbox stuff and some images. Doing that, let's do that like image gallery thing we were talking about the other day.
Will we be able to pull this
Mhm.
later? Okay. Awesome.
Yep, this will just be, when you do git pull later today, my notes from today and the links will be in there, and then this demo code will be in there. So let's make a page. npm. So let's open this up, and let's make a little image gallery. Oops, that's fine.
So is Instagram just like a flex container or picture?
I don't know what they use. It would be interesting to go like web inspect them and see what technology they use for laying things out. I'm not sure.
I mean, that's what it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, much of those image galleries are probably using Flexbox in some way, just because it's so much easier than not. So
what other options are there?
So we may touch lightly on CSS grids. So CSS grids is a new technology that's come out after Flexbox. So if you think about Flexbox, we've always talked about Flexbox in a row or a column, not in 2 dimensions. So grids lets us lay out things both horizontally and vertically at the same time and talk about them kind of in a 2-dimensional structure.
In Flexbox, could you use like a horizontal Flexbox as well as a vertical Flexbox to get like sort of an analog of
Yes. What you would have is you would have a parent container that's row, and then you would have maybe multiple containers inside that are column.
Okay.
So you can nest a column Flexbox inside of a row Flexbox.
But you can't necessarily apply both of them
At
to
the
the same
same.
parent. Okay.
That's where grids comes in.
Okay.
And grids tries to describe how am I laying things out horizontally and vertically at the same time? Cool. So let's make a little image gallery here. So I just did app. I just made a new app for today inside of my folder called Flexbox, and just like you kind of created your app for hobbies.
Right, okay.
I'm gonna make.
Did you put no on add to the GitHub?
I did because my repository, my cohort repository, is a repository, and I don't want to make repositories inside the repositories. I want day 1, day 2, day 3. Yeah. When I push this, it'll already be there. So,
Did you ever upload a list of your plugins that you use?
no, I added it to the handbook, so I'll add a link to there. So here's our little page. Yeah, I just copied and pasted. So I'm going to use this site called Lorem Pixum to generate a couple of random images into this page. So I'm going to make an image source is this. And I'm going to copy and paste that image.
What's that site called?
It's called Pixum. Pixum.photos. Pixum.photos. So there's also really awesome ones like Phil Murray. I love this. So this is for image fills. There's Phil Murray. There's also Place Kittens. Right?
Oh, I like that one.
Place Kittens. Right? So what's neat about these is if you do a 200 by 300, you get this cat. But if you do an 800 by 300, you get like a different cat. So every combination of widths and heights will give you different cats. Just like Lorem Pixum will give us different pictures.
You just do random, it picks random.
Yeah. So the kitten one will give you the same kitten every time, but Lorem Pixum, right? This is the picture if you're going to get for a 200 by 200. But if you tack on @ random, you're going to get a random picture every time
Does it just pull a random picture from
their site.
their site specifically?
Yeah.
From the ether.
Yeah.
So these are images that they on their server are hosting.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, so you notice every time I reload this page, I'm getting a different picture, but they're all 200 by 300. So let's style this a little. Let's do square pictures in the beginning. So I'm just gonna make these 200 by 200. So there's some nice square pictures. Let's do some CSS. Let's do all my ULs and OLs are this style none. Let's get rid of the dots. Let's set the margin to 0 and the padding to 0. Let's get rid of all the margin and padding around, so they should all bump up against each other. There's still... let's get rid of the margin and padding on the items. Oh, there's still some padding going on, unless that's in the image.
It looks like there's a white bar at the bottom of the image.
Yeah, it looks like that's true too. That's interesting. There's a little bit of a white bar at the bottom of that image. Let's see. Nope, it's actually in the page.
Could be in the picture. Oh, it isn't.
Yeah, because when I'm just highlighting the image, it's there. When I'm highlighting this, it's here. I'm not sure where that space is coming from. It is not margin or padding. Yeah, so when I highlight the image, see how the blue highlight is kind of really tight around the image? But when I highlight the LI, there's a little bit of
So
space.
it's somewhere in that width.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, cool. I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time on that. But that would be something interesting. I would try and figure out like what's going on there. So what I want to do now is I want to lay these out like an image gallery. Right? They're just a big old long list of images. I'm gonna put this. If you didn't know, you can put the little inspector on different sides of the page, right? So if you're working on something that's more like a vertical layout, you can tack this here. You can also pop it out so it's its own window if you need to see the entire thing, right? So in this case, I'm gonna pop it over here. It's just a little bit easier for me to work with while we're doing this. But you notice like my tabs now are a little bit harder to get to. So right? We want to flexibly deal with these images. So that means that I need to set flex on my parent. So now what I'm going to do is say all of my ULs are also display flex. And as soon as I've done that, right, now all of my images are running this way, right? But it's a big scroll. I don't want that to scroll. I will set flex wrap to wrap. And now my image is wrap, right? As I shrink this down, I kind of have an image gallery. I would like to do space between my images. So now, as I move my space around, right, I get this. Vertically, you want to do align content center. So if the page is bigger, we'll get all these images in the center. So I'm just looking at the design I want. And then figuring out what I want this to be. So what I would love is these images to be centered vertically in the page. It's not because my body is ending here. No, it's ending there. The body is ending there. The UL is ending there, right? So I want this UL to fill up the entire page. I wish this UL was as tall as my view, right? So I would like these to be centered in the page. I can ask my ULs to be height 100 VH. So VH stands for view height. So I'm asking my unordered list to be 100% of however tall the browser is right now.
And so that's referencing the viewport then?
The viewport,
Okay.
yeah. How big this is. And notice that once I've done that, my UL is filling the entire viewport. And now my align content is just vertically centering my images. And as I shrink this down, right, it's filling. So now if I want to push some space here in between, I can choose to put some margin on the top and the bottom. So maybe I'll do like 30 pixels, a top and bottom margin. Oops, nope, sorry, I want a top and bottom margin, not left and right margin. All right, so that margin still applies even when things are wrapping. Here's my margin, here's my margin, right? So even though these are in a row and they're wrapping, that margin will still help me create some space between them when they do wrap.
Can we open one of those?
So what's inside of here is just the image. Inside of here is just the image. Yeah. I was kind of hoping it would give me a different random image every time. So let's see what happens if we make some of these different sizes. 200 and 250. Right. I get something that looks like this, right? So like these are different sizes. Now if I wanted to flex control these, I could make my LIs flexed and then control the image that's inside.
And so that's how you would center that image that's like down at the top.
Yeah. So if I say LI, you should also be display flex align content center. See, I always have to go look it up. Align items. I should get. now my images are centered inside. So this little image is now centered inside here. Right? So now the UL is flexed with the LIs inside, and each individual LI is flexing the image that's inside. And I can control where that image is positioned inside.
And grid would allow you to do both at the same time?
Grid would help me describe this two-dimensional thing better.
Okay.
So I could say, I would love to have four things wide by 3 things tall, and then place things inside, and describe how much space I want around each thing. There are ways of doing that in Flexbox to say, please only allow there to be so many elements this way, to kind of give the illusion of a grid. But it gets kind of complicated to make Flexbox do that. That's where grids come in and are easier to deal with. You might hear some of the cohort 10 students talking about Bootstrap and Bootstrap grids, which is a CSS framework, a set of
Bootstrap
a set of common classes that give us grids. So people would go to something like Bootstrap, which is a set of CSS you can import into your project, and then use particular types of classes to describe a grid. The latest version of Bootstrap got rid of all their custom code and is just using grids. Because now CSS has grids, so they could just use the grids implementation that CSS gives us. So that tends to be the pattern that frameworks and libraries invent things to help developers, and then the parent of that says, oh, that's a really good idea, I will absorb that into my core technology, so we don't have to have some of those libraries around anymore. Cool. Let's take a look at what the homework is going to be for tonight. Cool. No, not responsive.
My canvas is ready.
No, this is not going to be this. Okay. We're not going to get to responsive layout today. So the next thing we're going to talk about is responsive layout, which is mobile versus desktop. Yeah, we're not going to talk about We'll talk about mini queries on Monday, because in 20 minutes we're not gonna make it. So I will assign a different homework assignment for tonight, other than that one. Cool. Any questions on this so far? No. Hopefully you can see that some of the things you were probably trying to do in your assignment last night would be easier to do with this. Like if you built a menu, right, probably easier to do with Flex than some of the things you were doing. Or if you were trying to lay out images or paragraphs in particular ways, probably easier to do this than to try and figure out margins and paddings to make things jump to where you want. So this is really something that you'll use quite often. And you'll notice even I keep coming back to this reference all the time to remember which things are.
Can you make the flex into a header?
You can flex anything you like. So one of the things that we're going to start to do is take existing designs. You're going to be given, here's a static design. I want you to implement this in HTML and CSS. Right? I may give you this website and say re-implement this website in HTML and CSS. So if you looked at this here, right? This may be a header tag, and maybe there is some elements inside that we're using display flex on, right? Maybe the rest of the page is a main tag with sections inside, and those are done with Flex and Flexbox.
Developer tools show us.
Which show us how Jason has done it. I may give you a design as an image file and say, you figure out how to do it, right? But we could come in here and say, well, how did Jason do this? He made a class called wrap, and this has a header and a nav and an unordered list, and then there's a little mobile nav thing hiding out here that's not shown in desktop. We don't know yet. We can't tell until we go look at the CSS for it, right? All we know now are these are the HTML elements he used. So he has a div around this, and he called that div wrap class, and he's got a header, a nav, and an order list. So if we
But
click
it's
on
cool
this,
to look at that though, because you can see how somebody who's obviously more proficient than definitely me,
mhm,
how they're doing their code, how they're attacking it in H1, then he did a nav,
Yes.
then he's doing the unordered list, then he's doing the like
yeah, and we'll talk once we get more tools under our belt about how you make these decisions and break these processes down.
Can you look at the CSS file?
Yeah, it's right down here. So the wrap is display flex. It's a line item center. It's justified content space between, and there's 0.5 rems of padding. If I turn off display flex, look what happens. Right?
Taking all the stuff in the header.
Right. It's just putting things in the header one after another. Right. So this div here is display wrap. Right. He probably could have done wrap on the header. I'd have to ask him why he put one div inside as opposed to putting flex on the header. Let's take a look at the nav. The nav is also display flex. So there's a shortcut here called flex1 that will set a whole bunch of different properties at once. It sets flex, grow, shrink, and basis all at the same time. If I turn this off, I end up getting a different spacing. And I bet if we look at this UL, this is also flexed. And if I turn this flex off, we just get a list of things. So this is a flex box that has a flex box that has a flex box inside of it to get this, right? So he's just controlling the spacing inside.
So he made a nav, then he had to put a flex box in that to be able to
He
mess
made-
with the parents.
He made the nav a flex box.
That's what I mean, so he can mess with the children of the nav in
Yes.
flex.
Yes.
He couldn't just do one because then it wouldn't affect the nav. It would only affect everything inside.
So he made the nav flex, but there's only one child in UL, so I don't know quite why he made the nav flex, because turning this on and off. Oh, I see. Right, because you wanted to control how much space the
Wanted-
navigation
yeah.
had
Okay.
on its own. And then the ULs themselves is basically just a list of links.
Right.
And he wanted that to be horizontal. Right, so he made that display flex. Right, and we could come in and say align content flex start. I guess there's really not that much space, so we really can't see. There's not enough space to really tell the difference between. Let's do align items.
How would text behave if you flexed the p tag that it was in?
It won't, because the text is not a child element. The text is just text at that point.
Okay.
Right. So that's just the content of the p tag. It's not a child tag. So flex
So it
only
only
applies
affects-
to child tags.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
So if a p tag had a bunch of spans inside, you could flex them. But p tags are really, when we use them, just means to like capture a paragraph of text.
Put the p tag inside of a div.
Yes. So you could have a div with p tags inside, and then you could flex all those
Flex
paragraphs.
the div.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he may have done that, say, with these. Right. These may be paragraphs. Right. Let's see. Yeah, these are paragraphs. And this aside is a display flex to control the paragraphs. Right? So otherwise, the header in the H3 and the P tags here would just flow naturally. But he said, I want these to be display flex. And he also set the direction column, right? Because we want to control them this way. Right, so this is a column of things. If we didn't say flex column, see how they just run in their natural left to right order? And we make them a column, they show up like this, right? So when you start looking at designs now, you're gonna start seeing rows of things with columns inside and columns of things with rows inside, right? And when you start looking at that, you're gonna start thinking about the parent of whatever that's wrapping, right? That's gonna be my flex container. And then I'm gonna use flex parameters to set how I want these things related to each other.
We open the community tab.
This one here. So this div is basically the same thing. There's an aside that has a header, a p tag, and a p tag. And this aside is going to be display flex. Same thing. And then we turn off the flex direction, right? We get columns. Right. Yeah. So you'll start to see as you like look around on different pages, like start inspecting things and see how they lay things out. I can tell you sometimes they're going to use really nice semantic tags. Like Jason's really into the making sure things are semantically nice and his CSS is clean. You're going to open up some of them and your brain's just going to explode because like they use like 400 different styles to achieve something, right? So not everything that looks beautiful like visually is going to be well constructed internally, and vice versa, right? So you got to apply a little bit of grains of salt when you're looking at different sites and how well they're designed.
What are his JavaScripts? What are his JavaScripts then?
I don't know how much JavaScript stuff he has on here. The JavaScript stuff would be under sources here. And he has...
Do you go back to the HTML?
Well, he's referencing, he's bringing in some scripts. Okay. This is Google Analytics. This is another plugin. I don't know what this plugin is for. And then there's some JavaScripts. What's that?
Google Analytics tells you like where the traffic's coming from.
Yep. And I'm sure he's got some JavaScript on the page to do some things. I don't know what he's built in to do that. Cool. All right. Tonight's homework will be to build another page. But to get some great practice on flexbox, this will definitely be part of your homework. So if you want to, like, before or after lunch, start working on this, there's a site called Flexbox Froggy. And it's literally a little game you'll play to, like, move this frog to the lily pad by kind of following the instructions here that just kind of describe all of the Flexbox bits, right? So this very first one is like, hey, welcome to Flexbox Froggy. It's a game where you like help this froggy get to the pad. Here, what we want to do is we want to use justified content to align the items. So it's kind of giving you some CSS here, and it's asking us to experiment with justify content, right? And maybe you try the different ones, like what does flex start do? What does flex end do? Hey, that's the one I'm looking for. The frogs on the lily pad. And then you'll go to the next one, right? And it's just a practice of what do all these different flex things do that's a little bit less dry than reading this. Yeah, so take some while and play with Flexbox Froggy, and then the homework will come out, which will be building something using the Flexbox things that you'll have learned from lecture and practice with Flexbox Froggy, and you're going to build some things. Cool? Awesome.